Very good, very good. Welcome, everyone. Happy Sunday. It's March 24th, 2024. We just all celebrated Nowruz. Hopefully, everyone here has had a happy holiday, happy Nowruz. We are beginning our part 3 session. Welcome, welcome. We're beginning our part 3 session. Miss Violetta Zane is our speaker today, as she has put together this amazing presentation on Shoghi Effendi, the Guardian. We are working together with the Immersive Ocean Inc. and Clearwater Baha'is and Violetta to bring this beautiful presentation that you can find on the Utterance Project, a YouTube channel and website dedicated to sharing the beauty of the utterances of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Baha in the original Persian and Arabic. You can find the chronologies for Baha'u'llah, the Blessed Beauty, for Abdu'l-Baha, the Extraordinary Life of Abdu'l-Baha, and the Primal Point for the Bab. Additionally, on the Utterance Project website, and also on the Clearwater Baha'is YouTube channel. You can find it on clearwaterbaha'is.org, as well as we are presenting the link and all the successive presentation links for your viewing pleasure. With that being said, we welcome Violetta. We thank you, Violetta, for beginning this part 3, which is about the Guardian. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be looking at the video, people here. If you see my screen, can you give me a thumbs up? Yay, awesome, wonderful. Okay, so today we're going to be doing The Guardian, Part 3, Abdu'l-Baha's Secretary, 1918 to 1920. I want to just say a little bit about this part before we start. The Guardian had 36 years as the Guardian. He started his guardianship at the age of 24. When I began writing the chronology, October 18th, 2023 was the first day I began writing. I made a decision at the very beginning that I made for all the other chronologies, which was to develop the youth of Shoghi Effendi as much as possible. So I dedicated 4 parts of the chronology to his childhood, his adolescence, his studies, his university, his youth, and his life as a normal human being. I ceased to be a normal human being. And these years, my friends, that we're going to look at together today are the most wonderful years of Shoghi Effendi's life. He is now a graduate. He is a double graduate. He has an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree from Syrian Protestant College. His English is beautiful. He can be at his grandfather's side as a very useful member of his entourage, as a translator of the incoming letters and the outgoing letters into English. And this is all he's ever wanted ever since he was a little boy at the age of 4 or 5, pulling on his grandfather's sleeve, asking him to write a tablet for him. All he's ever wanted was to serve his grandfather. And you're going to be able to enjoy this year and a half, actually, of Shoghi Effendi's best life. Better than when he was a child because he's no longer a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. Better than when he was a teenager because he doesn't have to go to boarding school and be separated from Abdu'l-Baha. These are the golden years of his life. And I do want to say one more thing, is that Shoghi Effendi was convinced that after Oxford, he would have another 20 years at least at his grandfather's side, doing the exact same service he's going to be doing in this part. Unfortunately, God willed it not to be the case, but this is the life that he'd always wanted. This part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi from the age of 21 in 1918 to the age of 23 in 1920. And we begin with 1918. Shoghi Effendi, Abdu'l-Baha's secretary, translator, and assistant. This is Shoghi Effendi, a picture from The Princess Pearl, seated in front of his trusty Corona typewriter, on which he's going to write everything he will ever write, including God Passes By. So from the time that he arrives in the Holy Land in the summer of 1918, And more so, after Ahmad Sohrab, who was the primary English translator, leaves a few months later, Shoghi Effendi becomes Abdu'l-Baha's main English translator and assistant. For 18 months, he's going to serve his beloved full-time. And this is the goal he's worked at least 10 years when he was a Syrian Protestant college in Beirut. He spends an immense amount of time in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha and will later say to Ruhiya Khanum, the master was like an ocean. Like an ocean, he could take anything you threw at him, any amount of test and difficulty, and no ripple would show on the surface. It would have been too overwhelming for anyone else to bear, but for the master, it was nothing. He was like an ocean. This is the first photograph of Abdu'l-Baha taken after the war, after 4 long years of separation with his beloved in the West. A photograph is taken as he's speaking, looks like he's speaking to a British officer that's inside one of the gardens at Bachi. And this is the very first photograph that the American and all the other believers see published in Star of the West. They've been so worried for Abdu'l-Baha over these years of war with no communication. 19 November 1918, the era of service. This is one of the few photographs that we have of Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi next to each other. These are on the steps of the master's house at 7 Haparsin. Between 1918 and 1919, we begin to start seeing the future guardian of the cause of Baha'u'llah emerging in full splendor through the deeds and words of Shoghi Effendi as Abdu'l-Baha's main English translator and assistant. And with Abdu'l-Baha's constant love, guidance, and encouragement, he's training his grandson. During these months, Shoghi Effendi is the embryonic guardian. He is laser focused on serving Abdu'l-Baha. He is consumed by one single desire to make his grandfather happy, to care for him, and to use every ounce of his energy in service to the center of the covenant. On the 19th of November, 1918, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to a friend in England, and it showcases all the different angles of this single overarching facet of his life, service to Abdu'l-Baha. He says that he's so glad and privileged to be able to attend to my beloved's service after completing my course of arts and sciences at the American University. The past 4 years have been years of misery, of severe famine and distress. This will now be the era for the message to be delivered in this liberated region without the least amount of restriction. This indeed is the era of service. Service is a constant preoccupation for Shoghi Effendi, who takes his cue from Abdu'l-Baha and sees everything with this spiritual lens. In his letters during this time, he almost never mentions anything personal, only service. Service and work and translation and what's happening in the faith around the world. Sometime in 1918, however, an interesting event happens. Shoghi Effendi deals with a British major to let Baha'u'llah's camel caravan into Haifa. Now, this is not Haifa. This is the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, but these camels are carrying wheat. And this is the subject of the story today. This story shows a very precise example in which Abdu'l-Baha gives Shoghi Effendi a major responsibility as a very young man and lets him manage it on his own, lets him successfully manage this responsibility. So what happened is at some
Looks like we lost Violette, so hopefully she'll be right back.
Hello?
Yes, welcome back. All right. If you can just pick up where you left.
Okay, so let me just repeat what I did. This is around 1918. This is after the end of the war. And Jordan Valley and Adasie and around Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee area with wheat and probably also corn for the inhabitants of Haifa and Akka. And so what happens is that one of Abdu'l-Baha's camel caravans is detained. It arrives at the gates of Haifa, and the British soldiers guarding the gate refuse to allow the caravan to enter. So two Baha'is each carry a sack of wheat, enter Haifa, and go straight to Abdu'l-Baha's house and explain the situation to the master. Abdu'l-Baha listens very carefully to what Furudi has to say. And then he sends him with Shoghi Effendi, who is 21 years old, to resolve the situation with a British official holding back Abdu'l-Baha's camel caravans. When they arrive at the gate, the commander of the guards, a British major, is relaxing in an armchair, smoking a pipe. And in his eloquent and fluent English, Shoghi Effendi explains to the major that the caravan of wheat was for Abdu'l-Baha. And Abdu'l-Baha, you will recall, saved the British because the British liberated Haifa before their supply train arrived, and they arrived with no food, and Abdu'l-Baha fed them. According to Furudi, the major, who is so amazed by the quality of Shoghi Effendi's English coming from someone so young, immediately orders the soldiers to open the gate for the caravan to enter Haifa. So on the 26th of December, 1918, Shoghi Effendi's thrilling life in Haifa. This is a tablet, facsimile of a tablet written and signed by Abdu'l-Baha in his own handwriting to the Baha'is in America about Zia Baghdadi, his wife, and her sister. And I put this here to show you what Shoghi Effendi is dealing with every day between 1918 and 1920. The handwritten tablets of Abdu'l-Baha that go out in this form all over the world, and sometimes he has to translate them into English. From this time, Shoghi Effendi has letters that he writes to very close friends of his, like Ali Yazdi. And these letters showcase his excitement. I mean, Shoghi Effendi's always loved geography. And for him, the thrill in late 1918, early 1919, is to receive these letters from everywhere around the world, from places that he would have to look up on a globe or a map to see where this letter came from, and translating and the responses of Abdu'l-Baha. And so in his letter to Ali Yazdi, he says, every day carries with it fresh tidings and happy news. From the far eastern land, the center of news has shifted today to Persia, in the Middle East, and thence to the extreme east of the US, of America. Many telegrams have arrived. Far from the dear land of Persia, the doors of which are still practically closed, there is some good news saying that the friends are well and united. From Boston and Chicago alike, news arrives that the friends rejoice at Abdu'l-Baha's deliverance, supplicate tablets, and even beg the master to come to their shores. It's been too long. They want to see Abdu'l-Baha again. January 1919. So now Shoghi Effendi's been in the Holy Land about 6 months, 4 months to 6 months. And there is a tremendous volume of work. This is the way Shoghi Effendi dressed before. Let me show you the picture in whole here. There you go. See the ballooning pants, white shoes, a white jacket. This is more an Oriental type of dress. And this is how he used to dress before he went to Oxford. He will change the way he dresses when he goes to Oxford, and he will start dressing as we know him, with his blazers and his coats and his dark fez. So 4 months after Shoghi Effendi's arrival in January 1919, Abdu'l-Baha has revealed more than 100 tablets to the friends in America in the space of 4 months. So it is a lot of work. And Abdu'l-Baha is in his 70s, and he is just at full speed ahead, works more than full time, more than 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. And the deluge of work is such that Abdu'l-Baha continues a letter saying, My head is in a whirl, so busy and so eventful was the day. No less than a score of callers from prince and pasha to simple private soldier have sought interview with Abdu'l-Baha. The beloved from morn till eve, even at midnight, is engaged in revealing tablets, sending forth his constructive, dynamic thoughts of love and principles to a sad and disillusioned world. So Abdu'l-Baha is working until midnight, and if he is working until midnight, so is Shoghi Effendi. So in this year and a half between 1918 and 1920, Shoghi Effendi increasingly accompanies Abdu'l-Baha to official functions. This is an absolutely gorgeous photograph, very high quality from Baha'i Media Bank of Abdu'l-Baha writing in Haifa. But the picture in whole is very beautiful because you can see Abdu'l-Baha completely writing this tablet. It's very beautiful. And this is probably around the time that Shoghi Effendi was serving him. So it's very contemporary to this story. The events that Shoghi Effendi accompanies Abdu'l-Baha to are official functions where he's going to meet the British military governor of Haifa, Sir Edmund Allenby, the general who liberated who led the Allied forces in Palestine. And as he goes to these events with his grandfather, Shoghi Effendi is also becoming known to these people. And this is going to be important in 2 years' time when Abdu'l-Baha suddenly passes away and this young 24-year-old Shoghi Effendi becomes the guardian. He will be dealing with people who he will have met in the company of his grandfather just a couple of years prior. And also in this time, you see this constant companionship. And I very much love this picture, even though it's a little hastily taken and maybe off center, but you see Abdu'l-Baha entering the Eastern Pilgrim House here, and then you see Shoghi Effendi here, outside, waiting for him. This is a beautiful image of the companionship that they enjoyed during this year and a half. And it no doubt was a great source of satisfaction for both grandfather and grandson. Like Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi starts to spend a lot of time with pilgrims. This is something that will be a part of his life for the next 40 years. He will, with the end of the war, Abdu'l-Baha's heroic efforts during the conflict to save people's lives with all of his camel loads of wheat and corn become well known. And Shoghi Effendi has a front row in carefully observing how Abdu'l-Baha deals with high-ranking officials, local and regional notables, international figures, celebrities, well-known generals, heroes of the war. He sees very closely how Abdu'l-Baha conducts himself in the toxic atmosphere created by the enemy, the envy, the jealousy, and the intrigues of the enemies, the covenant breakers, both internal and external enemies. So the covenant breakers and external enemies of the faith. And these precious lessons are going to be the bedrock of Shoghi Effendi's 36-year guardianship. He's going to learn so many of the most fundamental lessons about the status of the faith and the protection of the faith from being at his grandfather's side for this year and a half. Between the 8th and 10th of February, 1919, this is just a photograph, but I did not want to miss it because you can see Shoghi Effendi here on the steps of the Abdu'l-Baha's home at 7 Haparsim with Abdu'l-Baha in the front and Shoghi Effendi in the back. I tried to put all the pictures I could find with Shoghi Effendi and Abdu'l-Baha together. During February 1919, Shoghi Effendi writes diary letters to Star of the West. Diary letters were something that Ahmad Sohrab wrote for many years. And then he eventually left the Holy Land in 1919 to bring the tablets of the Divine Plan to New York for their unveiling. And he never returned. And Shoghi Effendi wrote three diary letters during this time. And I'm going to be quoting just a little bit of each of them just to show you the perspective of Shoghi Effendi, how you can see the guardian even when he was 21 years old, 22 years old. This is just a crowded street of Lahore, Pakistan, because the diary letter of Shoghi Effendi has to do with someone who's coming from Lahore. This Captain Agal Khan of Lahore, Punjab, who was a devout Muslim, came to visit Abdu'l-Baha. This man called on Abdu'l-Baha with a letter, with an article written by someone in Rangoon, published in the local Indian newspapers of Punjab. So it was published in Rangoon in Burma, which is Myanmar, and then it was republished in Lahore, Pakistan, or in the Indian papers of Punjab. And he, who was in Pakistan, managed to get his hands on this article, had it translated in English, and when he was coming to Haifa, brought it with him. So you see this sort of spread of the news of Abdu'l-Baha from Burma to Pakistan, and then now brought to Haifa by a captain who was a Muslim, but who was interested in the faith. These are the kinds of people that Abdu'l-Baha is dealing with, and the kinds of people that Shoghi Effendi learns how to deal with at the side of his grandfather. The article in question, as Shoghi Effendi says, was a lucid and at the same time striking account of the teachings of the cause, of the early life, the declaration, the persecution and the martyrdom of the Bab, and the rise of Baha'u'llah, his early trials, his exile, his declaration, and his amazing power displayed in the distant fortress of Akka. Just want to pause for a minute and say that these are excellent and succinct, but very clear and accurate accounts of the birth of the Babi and Baha'i faiths that were published in Myanmar and in Punjab. So the spread of the faith is far beyond what we believe to be in 1919. These excellent articles are being published in remote corners of the globe. This captain was amazed to learn that the remains of the Bab, who was shot in Tabriz, were safely interred on Mount Carmel, right in the city where he's visiting. And he was so happy to hear that Baha'u'llah had pitched his tent on that same mountain. So he absolutely wanted to visit the shrine and the holy shrine in Akka. And when he left, he told Abdu'l-Baha that next time he would bring more of his Indian friends with him and colleagues who wished to meet Abdu'l-Baha. It's a lovely story because you could see the excitement of this man who's coming from Pakistan, and he's going back to Pakistan, but he wants to bring all his friends back with him. You could just imagine the joy of Shoghi Effendi at experiencing this. The next day, on the 9th of February, 1919, is a second diary letter that Shoghi Effendi will write. And he is going to write about a talk Abdu'l-Baha gives about, among others, these two gentlemen. On the left, Ptolemy, an Egyptian mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, geographer, and music theorist who wrote about a dozen scientific treatises, were very important to the foundation of science as we understand it now. And on the right, Copernicus, a Renaissance polymath from Poland, who was active as a mathematician, an astronomer, and a Catholic canon, who formulated a model of the universe that placed the sun rather than the earth at its center. And so this conversation that Shoghi Effendi is going to tell people about in his diary letter to the Star of the West, he's going to tell everyone about this conversation. This is a conversation that becomes very informally because Mr. Bahadur, who is a student at Syrian Protestant College, is visiting, and Abdu'l-Baha asks this man if they are still holding spiritual activities. And the young man says that they never miss Sunday devotional meeting. Then he mentions something about Bible classes, and Shoghi Effendi relates Abdu'l-Baha's astounding response. Abdu'l-Baha picks up on the subject of the Bible, which the president of the Syrian Protestant College studies weekly. He studies the Bible weekly. He's a very devout man. And he embroiders from these Bible classes an absolutely majestic masterclass argument regarding progressive revelation, beginning with the Old Testament, continuing on to the Gospels, the Quran, and proving his point by weaving in intellectual thought currents in a way that is so masterful that that Shoghi Effendi is just in awe. And what's very interesting is that as the guardian, Shoghi Effendi will do this himself. He will astound pilgrims by weaving the history of intellectual philosophy and religion and the history of religion together in the show the threads that belong to this tapestry of progressive revelation. And I think that's really what we should remember from this, is that he is learning so many things from Abdu'l-Baha at his side. This is a very interesting, this is also something that we can trace a direct link with the guardianship, this story. I love this story very, very dearly. Abdu'l-Baha, throughout his life, consistently supported charities wherever he was. Even if he was in America, he would give money to the Bowery, which fed men who were unemployed. If he was in England, he gave money to charities who helped mothers who had single mothers. He gave money for the building of a hospital when he was in Edinburgh at Mrs. White's house. He gave generously and liberally to everyone, really. Always, especially if it was causes to alleviate suffering and alleviate poverty, he always gave. So after the war, there was the military administration began a relief fund called the Haifa Relief Fund to alleviate the suffering of the people of Haifa. Abdu'l-Baha first contributed 50 Egyptian pounds, roughly equivalent today to $3,550. After the first contribution, Abdu'l-Baha's name was placed #1 on the list of contributors. But then, and this is why I like this story, why I think this story is very interesting, Abdu'l-Baha then sent another 50 Egyptian pounds, so another $3,550, contributed by Shoghi Effendi. And he received a letter back from the military governor, G.A. Stanton, saying, acknowledging, I received today the sum of 50 pounds as a further donation from yourself and from your grandson to the Haifa Relief Fund. So he's very, very grateful. I mean, it's a very generous gesture. But what is happening when Abdu'l-Baha gives the 50 pounds through Shoghi Effendi is he makes Shoghi Effendi an actor in that donation. And this becomes one of the centerpieces of Shoghi Effendi's life. For the rest of his life, until the moment he dies, he will give generously as the guardian to every worthy cause, whether it's a university being started, whether people need a classroom, he will let them use the House of Aboud during the Second World War. This generosity that Abdu'l-Baha had is conveyed, is transmitted intact in the same intensity, in the same love, in the same amount, in the same empathy to Shoghi Effendi. And this is yet another thing that brings them closer in this year and a half that they spend living and working with each other in such close companionship. Shoghi Effendi's third diary letter to Star of the West is published the next day. So the 3 letters are published the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th of February, 1919. This is the Haifa grain market around 1904 in peacetime and 15 years before the hunger assailed the population of Haifa. This photograph is excellent, beautiful photograph, is from the library, the World Congress Library. So all of the letters that he published are very different in in content, really. The first one was about this Pakistani captain who came and who was just so enthusiastic and brought this letter from Punjab, this article from Punjab that was published from Burma. The second one was about this scientific and religious progressive revelation, as explained by Abdu'l-Baha so brilliantly, that just completely amazed Shoghi Effendi. And this one is about the Haifa Relief Fund. So that's why it's the image is showing this past wealth of grain, because the population of Haifa is suffering greatly as Shoghi Effendi is there. And so this is what Shoghi Effendi says in the letter. He says, the misery and need of the civilian population of Haifa at the time of British and Allied occupation has necessitated the formation of a Haifa Relief Fund, composed of the heads of different religious denominations and acting under the surveillance of the British authorities, with a fund collected and deposited at the newly established branch of the Anglo-Egyptian Bank. So I think that we're starting to get an idea of what is surrounding Shoghi Effendi in 1918, 1919. There are amazing people coming from Pakistan. Abdu'l-Baha is absolutely brilliant. He's generous. He gives to all these charities. But there is not only internal enemies, so there's the covenant breakers that are on the periphery, and there is suffering of the population after these many lean years of the war. The day after, on the 11th of February, Shoghi Effendi writes another diary letter published in Star of the West, Volume 10, Issue 11. And in this diary letter, he gives news of what is happening in Persia. But I want to get to that a little bit later. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this picture. After Persia was able to send mail again following World War I, these were the types of news that were being published in Baha'i journals and magazines. This picture here is a photograph of Muhammad Labib's Baha'i class for girls in Ghazvin, Persia, the hometown of Tahrir, that was sent to Star of the West by Dr. John Eslamont. The students marked with an X on their shoulders also attend Dr. Muhammad Labib's Esperanto, they're also his Esperanto students. And I think that's just absolutely wonderful, just to think that these little girls in Ghazvin are Esperanto students, and they must be, you know, some of them are like 12, 13, you know, it's just wonderful news. And this image was published in Star of the West. So 11th of February 1919 is an important date because it's the first batch of letters that Abdu'l-Baha receives from Persia and India since the outbreak of World War I. So the first pieces of news that Abdu'l-Baha receives from Persia and India in over 4 years arrives to him on the 11th of February 1919, nearly 5 years without any news of the Baha'is who are in the cradle of the faith. And I don't know if you can imagine what that could have meant to Abdu'l-Baha to receive that package of letters on the 11th of February. Shoghi Effendi describes in his letter to Star of the West the sufferings of the Persian friends and the sad state of Persia itself. And this is, for those of you who are familiar with Shoghi Effendi's writings as the guardian, like The Promised Day Is Come and The Advent of Divine Justice and the World Order of Baha'u'llah, the golden age of the cause of Baha'u'llah, you will see the burgeoning guardian in these turns of phrases, speaking about and casting his eye on society and the health of society and what is happening in the world. He's speaking of Persia. Their meetings, notwithstanding famine, pestilence, rapine, internal war, and isolation from the Holy Land, have been regularly conducted and elaborately organized. Factions and parties have failed in their aims and have met disappointment in the realization of their aspirations. The nationalists, the reactionaries, the liberals, the Democrats have left Persia a desolate country. And then a little bit later, Shoghi Effendi recontextualizes history within the framework of Baha'i history. And there, I really think you can hear the future guardian speaking. A government that has persecuted, tortured, exiled, burned, and devastated the homes of those who were related to this cause has now placed its full confidence and has elected a Baha'i, Ali Kuli Khan, to be its representative at the Great International Congress sitting at Paris. And this is just because I absolutely love Shoghi Effendi and I love Fujita, and I just have a picture of both of them together. I don't have a story to go with this, but I just love the picture. There you go. This is Shoghi Effendi standing with Saichiro Fujita in 1919. Saichiro had come to Haifa at the master's invitation for service and would remain on and off, serving first Abdu'l-Baha, then Shoghi Effendi, finally the Ministry of the Custodians and the Universal House of Justice until his passing in Haifa in 1976. He is just an absolutely wonderful person. 13th of February, 1919, Haji Muhammad Yazdi's pilgrimage. This is Ali Yazdi's father. If you were here last week, you will remember how big a role Ali Yazdi played. Ali Yazdi is the brother of very well-known Aziz Yazdi, and this is their father, Haji Muhammad Yazdi. He comes on pilgrimage while Shoghi Effendi is serving Abdu'l-Baha and brings wonderful and significant news from Damascus, where he's living, a supplication of a very erudite and influential Muslim Saudi, native of Medina, one of the two holiest cities for Islam, who has become deeply attracted to the faith. Abdu'l-Baha's advice to him and to all the friends is deliver the divine message with prudence and wisdom. And on the 18th of February, 1919, so that would be 5 days later. 5 days later, here's a photograph of Abdu'l-Baha pacing with his hands held behind his back near the shrine of Baha'u'llah in Bahchi, taken in the middle of the summer of 1919 by Shoghi Effendi and sent to Star of the West by Shoghi Effendi. During his service to Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi had many occasions to go to Bahchi with Abdu'l-Baha. And on one occasion, Shoghi Effendi had gone to Bahchi with Abdu'l-Baha and wrote a letter to a friend dated the 18th of February, 1919, talks about the stark contrast between the air in Haifa and the air in Bahchi. And this is what he says, Shoghi Effendi. Greetings with sweet remembrances to you, my far-off friend, from this hallowed spot. The air over there was filled with gases and vapors, which steam and motor engines continuously discharge, while the atmosphere here is as clear and as fragrant as it can be. I think because the photographs are always so beautiful and dainty and elegant, we forget how noisy and dirty 1919 was. You know, we forget that it was all coal and coal burning engines, and the cars smelled bad, and there was a lot. It was much more polluting than it is now, much more nauseous and toxic. And so it's very interesting to see Shoghi Effendi make this point. This is another photograph just because. I'm going to have a lot of just because photographs in this section because I figured Shoghi Effendi might not be too excited about an entire chronology being written about him, but he would certainly love pictures with his grandfather and him. And so here is Shoghi Effendi here, right here, with this very handsome blazer, coat, and Abdu'l-Baha, of course, in the center of the photograph. Here we have Haji Mirza Haidar Ali. We don't have really a date for this photograph, but between 1918 and 1919. So April, May 1919, the long and dismal years of war. I chose this picture on purpose, tried to find the most stern picture I could of Abdu'l-Baha to speak about what I wanted to speak about, which was, it was really, Shoghi Effendi was a very sensitive young man. And so these years of war and earning his degree in Lebanon, in Beirut, during the war, in the Middle East, as the war was raging through Europe, of course, would leave traces on Shoghi Effendi's very, very sensitive and very tender soul. And in a letter he wrote in April 1919, Shoghi Effendi describes the years of dire starvation and privations, which millions of people suffered around him, including Abdu'l-Baha and his own family. And he says, the long and dismal years of war, bloodshed, famine, and pestilence, when the Holy Land was isolated from the different regions of the world and was undergoing the utmost and severest degree of repression, tyranny, and devastation. Just felt like this was a very important reminder that no one left World War I unscathed. Even if Abdu'l-Baha was safe, the family suffered. This, on the 25th of April, 1919, Shoghi Effendi wrote a letter to Dr. Zia Baghdadi, which was published in Star of the West, Volume 10, Issue 6. This is a photograph of Abdu'l-Baha and 16 Baha'is that was published like this, numbered, and published in Star of the West. And you see number 17 is Shoghi Effendi. Number 16 is the first French Baha'i, Hippolyte Dreyfus. Number 15 is, of course, Madame Dreyfus Barnet. Yeah. It's in this letter, Shoghi Effendi gives a panorama of the volume of letters that Abdu'l-Baha receives from every corner of the globe. From the United States, the Middle East, Persia, Turkmenistan, Japan, Hawaii, New Zealand, and Australia. The most fascinating aspect of this letter is the great detail Shoghi Effendi goes into while he's describing the situation of the Baha'is in Persia and the conditions of the country. Of course, that was already covered earlier, but this will be the first time it's published in Star of the West, and so it's going to be new, and it's going to be very heartbreaking for the American believers to hear how much their brethren in Persia have suffered. Shortly after this, a couple of weeks after this is published in Star of the West, is a major event of a very important consequence. Between the 26th and the 30th of April, 1919, the tablets of the Divine Plan are unveiled at the National Baha'i Convention in New York. And a lot of little girls are chosen, very cute little girls are chosen to do the unveiling. And Shoghi Effendi's future wife, Mary Maxwell, Ruhiya Khanum, is one of the little girls that will unveil a tablet. So these tablets were revealed by Abdu'l-Baha during the war. I would say probably during the most dangerous part of the war, the spring of 1916 and the spring of 1917. Abdu'l-Baha managed to mail the first 5 or 6 tablets on the front and back of postcards, but then the communications was cut off, and he safeguarded all the 14 tablets in their original form in a vault inside the shrine of the Bab. And he had them hand-delivered to America because they were so important. He had them hand-delivered to America by Ahmad Sohrab. And now was finally the time for them to be unveiled. And these tablets are very important because they constitute the first systematic teaching plan in the entire Baha'i dispensation, the first teaching plan. We are on our 45th teaching plan now, I believe, the 9-year plan, but the first plan is the tablets of the Divine Plan. And not only is it the first teaching plan in Baha'i history. It is the basis for all future teaching plans. All of the current teaching plans that we have, all of the teaching plans, including the 10-year crusade that were inaugurated by the Guardian, all find their spiritual root and inspiration in Abdu'l-Baha's tablet of the divine plan. They are the basis for the spread of the faith to every corner of the planet, and they will continue to be our guidance for the rest of the formative age. And of course, I couldn't leave this section without showing you the lovely ladies who unveil the tablets. You have these tablets here on the wall here, and this is the beautiful, the peerless, the wonderful, the magnificent Mary Maxwell. Mary Maxwell, whom Abdu'l-Baha loved so much. Oh my goodness. And on the 8th of May, 1919, Shoghi Effendi writes a letter to Lutfullah Hakim, published in Star of the West. Now, the point of all of these letters, diary letters published in Star of the West, or letters written to individual believers published in Star of the West, the reason why they have such a place in the chronology is because they help us to see things through Shoghi Effendi's eyes. And this is a chronology that wants to understand, as much as our feeble minds can understand, who was the Guardian? What did he care about? What were the things that were close to his heart? And a lot of these, although it sounds boring to say, oh, they're in letters, but yes, letters are where he expresses himself fully. And so we can gain amazing insight into Shoghi Effendi 2 to 3 years before he becomes our beloved Guardian, in what was occupying his mind, how he was thinking of things, what were his priorities, and that helps us grow closer to him. So that's why I put so many letters in here. In this letter, written to a future member of the Universal House of Justice, Dr. Lutfullah Hakim, Shoghi Effendi gives a concise and a vivid picture of Abdu'l-Baha's heavy workload, which is what I found interesting. The master has been quite busy of late and has revealed many tablets to the friends in America, England, France, Japan, Switzerland, Corsica, Germany, Persia, India, New Zealand, and Egypt. But, and this is why I like this, because this is going to determine also, the Guardian is going to be exactly like this. The news he is most excited to share is regarding the progress of the faith in India, where they're about to hold their annual convention. And this excites Shoghi Effendi very much. From India, refreshing and encouraging news is being received. The Baha'i work is assuming great proportions, is being centralized, and is receiving a great impetus from the unceasing and well-directed activities of friends. The friends are stirred and active and are convinced that an increase of energy on their part, a fresh outburst of zeal and ardor and efficient service to the cause of God, will draw Abdu'l-Baha to their shores. So this is a major point. We're going to come back to this, but remember that the Baha'is of India are doing their utmost. They are trying to put forth as much energy as possible in order to get Abdu'l-Baha to come and visit them. Just remember that. And this is just, I'm sure if I spent 3 days pouring through the Guardian's letters, I could find a sentence that would be exactly similar to exactly this sentence. From India, refreshing and encouraging news is being received. I guarantee you, I've read this before in actual letters of the Guardian. And the way that Shoghi Effendi expresses himself at the age of 22 is just, it's amazing. This is a lovely, lovely, lovely story. This takes place in the summer of 1919. This is a supplication of 1,500 American Baha'is. This is a very cute story, actually. So these are all the signatories. I managed to get all the pages together and then like put them all together. This is 1,500 people who signed a letter to Abdu'l-Baha. So this letter, which was published in Star of the West before Shoghi Effendi left the Holy Land to England to pursue his studies at Oxford, focuses in its entirety on the supplication of Abdu'l-Baha, which Abdu'l-Baha received from 1,500 American Baha'is. Now, how the supplication came to be is very interesting. Karl Scheffler, one of those who signed the petition, explains to Abdu'l-Baha that the greatest suffering of the Baha'is of the United States and Canada was to be cut off from Abdu'l-Baha for 5 years because there was no mail coming or going. So they had no news and they were completely cut off immediately after receiving Abdu'l-Baha on their shores. Can you imagine? So they all got to meet Abdu'l-Baha and completely fall in love with Abdu'l-Baha. And they were looking forward to exchanging letters with him. And then all of a sudden, World War I happens and they cannot hear from their beloved for 4 or 5 years. Karl Scheffler describes that when the North American Baha'i community received news that Abdu'l-Baha was safe by cable, they received a cable that he was safe through the British embassy, their worries were replaced with joy. And so the first feast held in Chicago after hearing that wonderful news that their beloved of beloveds, Abdu'l-Baha, was safe and sound after the war, they decided to write a supplication. But then what they decided to do, they had an idea. They said the entire country should sign the supplication, not just the Baha'is of Chicago. So the secretary was instructed to send a letter to all the communities in North America and present the matter to them. And this woman named Jean Masson wrote the supplication. And it took weeks and weeks to obtain all the signatures, all of the 1,500 signatures. And it reached Abdu'l-Baha in early January 1919. And the supplication read, "To our beloved Abdu'l-Baha, we, thy humble servants in America, rejoice that the door of communication is at last open, and we beg of God that it may ever remain so. Unworthy as are we, yet we supplicate thee, we beseech thee, if it be God's will, to turn thy blessed countenance towards us, that the regions of the West, even the East, may be quickened by thy glorious presence." This is the second time that Baha'is are inviting, likely not just the second, likely the countless nth time that Baha'is write to invite Abdu'l-Baha to come to their country, because now that they know Abdu'l-Baha can travel, because he traveled to 9 countries in 1910, 1913, now they just want him to keep traveling and come and see them as well. So everybody's inviting Abdu'l-Baha because it's the best thing you could possibly do, right? So just remember that, because that's very important. Abdu'l-Baha is in such great health. He is in the best health of his life. This is 2 years before he passes away. But yet he is in such wonderful health. Everyone is inviting him to come and visit. And he's working more than 12 hours a day until way past midnight. He is the picture of health and energy. Abdu'l-Baha's mail often hide wonderful surprises, and this is an example of surprises. This is just very, very sweet. The Baha'is of Kenosha, Wisconsin, hung out. They had a feast, or I don't even think it was a feast, but it was on August 24th and 25th, I think. August 24th and 25th, and it says a day in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it's just a picture of all these Baha'is smiling. It looks like all they're doing is just eating. But then they found some time to write in Persian. And then they said, "This is for the favor of God upon the friends of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha in Kenosha, Wisconsin." Now, Abdu'l-Baha has received this historic supplication of 1,500 people. This is not the same thing as this picture here. And he has instructed Shoghi Effendi exactly on how to respond, because it is a very, very important thing that they've done. They've organized themselves. They've gotten 1,500 signatures from all over the United States. And what Abdu'l-Baha told Shoghi Effendi is he wanted the supplication to be printed in English and Persian in the same issue of Star of the West. He wanted all 1,500 names of all 1,500 signatories to be included in that number of Star of the West. And he pointed out to Shoghi Effendi, no matter how voluminous the issue may become. So issue number 8 was 32 pages, double the length of a regular Star of the West issue. But Abdu'l-Baha also gave directives that at least a couple of copies of the issue containing the supplication, along with a photograph of the 1919 American Convention, be forwarded to Persia. an address to Baha'i individual and assemblies. So this is also Shoghi Effendi showing, this is also Abdu'l-Baha showing Shoghi Effendi how to determine which news is going to lift the spirits of the friends in Iran, how to share it, how to include them, to translate all those things, you know. And Shoghi Effendi will do this over and over and over and over again during his own ministry as guardian of the Baha'i Faith. And one of his greatest passions will be the Baha'i world. And this is sort of like a preamble to that work. It's very similar work, choosing the images and writing the story and publishing it. And this, on the 24th of August, 1919, is an interesting story because you see exactly how late Abdu'l-Baha works, or early, depending on if you're early bird or night owl. This is another photograph of Abdu'l-Baha, and no, this is actually no Abdu'l-Baha in this photograph. This is just Shoghi Effendi with his arms crossed and in his outfit from pre-Oxford days, white long jacket. Also no date for this, but before 1920. Shoghi Effendi's long work hours and his habit of working at all hours of the day or night, from the early morning to the middle of the night, was another characteristic he shared with his beloved grandfather. On the 24th of August, 1919, as Shoghi Effendi described in a letter he wrote to his friend Ali Yazdi, he was still in bed, sleeping, when Abdu'l-Baha woke him up with a gentle knock on his grandson's door, and with a sweet voice calling Shoghi Effendi to wake up, shake off your slumber, and come and attend to your work. Shoghi Effendi was utterly delighted. What a wonderful way to be woken up, with work by his beloved. Serving Abdu'l-Baha was Shoghi Effendi's highest aspiration. It was his ultimate calling. It was his service to his grandfather was his only joy. He repeated all the times during those blessed years when he was Abdu'l-Baha's private English secretary, I am in the service of my beloved. I am in the service of my beloved. I am in the service of my beloved. These were the days of Shoghi Effendi's life when he was most blissfully happy. They would never return to him. Summer of 1919, all of Shoghi Effendi's friends leave. This is a very beautiful picture from Ali Yazdi's book, Blessings Beyond Measure. Baha'i students from Syrian Protestant College en route to Germany at Abdu'l-Baha's instructions to continue their studies. Ali Yazdi is third from the left. 1, 2, 3. Is that Ali Yazdi? Yeah. So over the summer of 1919, while Shoghi Effendi's been in the service of his grandfather for now a year, one by one and several at a time, all of Shoghi Effendi's classmates, his close group of friends from Syrian Protestant College in Beirut, leave for university and scatter from Persia to Europe and some even to America. It was a little bit depressing to Shoghi Effendi to see all his friends leaving in all these parts of the globe, the end of a happy era of closeness and companionship. For years, these men had studied together and become close friends, studious classmates, and they were held together by very affectionate bonds of friendship, but now life was pulling them all apart in different parts of the globe. The student Baha'i group at Syrian Protestant College, that very bonded group of brilliant, active, and upright young men who had stayed close through the 4 years of World War I, they were all now splitting up. So that was a bittersweet moment in Shoghi Effendi's 1919 summer. The only consolation during this time of many farewell was that he thought that each and every single one of them, in their own specific, particular way, would serve the faith and serve Baha'u'llah. Of course, the last to leave for Shoghi Effendi, the most important one, is Ali Yazdi, who leaves Haifa in the late summer of 1919 for his university studies in Germany. And this is the personal letter of introduction revealed by Abdu'l-Baha for Ali Yazdi and signed in his own hand, addressed to the Baha'is of Germany. For this young man Ali Yazdi, who for 9 years has been the very close friend of his beloved grandson, Shoghi Effendi. Ali Yazdi had returned home after graduation to Damascus, and he stayed there until the end of the war. He'd studied civil engineering at Syrian Protestant College, and he'd gotten a job as draftsman for the government. He was earning a little bit, not saving anything. By the summer of 1919, he was 20 years old. He was pinching pennies, and he didn't have enough money for graduate school. Abdu'l-Baha learned of Ali Yazdi's financial predicament and offered him 100 pounds, 6,300 pounds in today's currency, for him to continue his studies at the Technische Hochschule in Berlin. Abdu'l-Baha's generous gift made Ali Yazdi's future a possibility. And he wasted no time, leaving Damascus as soon as he could for Haifa to bid farewell to Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi before starting university. He arrived on the 24th of August, 1919, and it would be the last time he would ever see Abdu'l-Baha alive. Ali Yazdi only stayed in Haifa a couple of days, but before he left, Abdu'l-Baha called him to his room where he was alone with Shoghi Effendi. Abdu'l-Baha invited Ali to sit and asked Shoghi Effendi to serve his friend some tea. The master gave Ali Yazdi life advice and told him that he had high hopes for him, telling him, "You are a good boy, Sheikh Ali." The tea Shoghi Effendi served Ali was boiling hot and he couldn't drink it. But Abdu'l-Baha said, drink your tea." So Ali drank the boiling tea. At the end of their meeting, Abdu'l-Baha gave Ali his blessing, stood up and called the young man over to him. Abdu'l-Baha embraced Ali Yazdi in his arms, kissed him on both cheeks. Ali Yazdi never saw Abdu'l-Baha again, but the master had personally written him a letter of recommendation to the Baha'is of Germany, which I believe is this one. And I believe the text says, "O ye friends of God, His Honor Sheikh Ali is one of the firm friends. Exercise toward him love and kindness." Ali Yazdi left Haifa by train for Port Said, Egypt, and Shoghi Effendi came to the station to see Ali and 5 other friends off. Shoghi Effendi loved his friend so much that he sat in the compartment until the train was about to leave, and then he said goodbye and asked Ali to write him. After Port Said, Egypt, they would make their way to Alexandria and board a small, old Italian ship bound for Venice, where each would go his own way. September, December 1919. On the 27th of September 1919, something very interesting happened. Abdu'l-Baha basically took out an entire page of Star of the West and introduced all the Baha'is of the world to his grandson. And he organized the whole thing. So this is the page. And this is, I was very interested when I discovered this. I thought that was a very interesting thing to do. This is a full photograph that was commissioned by Abdu'l-Baha of Shoghi Effendi. And in Star of the West, it says, Shoghi Rabbani, grandson of Abdu'l-Baha. Grandson of is in italics. Then underneath it says, translator of recent tablets to and letters from Baha'is of the United States and Canada. Below that, it says, writer of diary letters beginning in this issue of Star of the West. See page 216. The most important thing in all of this is Shoghi Rabbani, grandson of Abdu'l-Baha. Ruhiya Khanum believes that Abdu'l-Baha himself directed Shoghi Effendi to make sure the photograph and the title were published in order, she believes, to publicly clarify their family relationship. Now, this is, you can trust if Ruhiya Khanum, hand of the cause Amatul-Baha Ruhiya Khanum, says something about Shoghi Effendi and Abdu'l-Baha, you can take that to the bank. So if she believes that Abdu'l-Baha directed Shoghi Effendi to make sure the title was published like this, and that these things were listed, you can be sure that she's absolutely right, because she was extremely careful with her pronouncements. She would not have said this if she wasn't absolutely positive. And again, another photograph. See, we have a lot of photographs actually of Shoghi Effendi and Abdu'l-Baha. I love these photographs because this is such a happy time in Shoghi Effendi's life. Shoghi Effendi is here, crossing his arms, wearing a black fez and a white jacket and these pantaloons that he wears. And Abdu'l-Baha is right next to him. This is with a group of pilgrims on the 2nd of October, 1919. So actually, this one we do have a date for. This is a lovely little excerpt here. Is between the 5th of November 1919 and the 23rd of January 1920, Baha'u'llah and the New Era. Now this is really lovely because Dr. John S. Lamont is going to be a very, very loyal, generous, kind, giving, and loving friend to Shoghi Effendi through his studies in England first, and then after the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, and then as his first secretary, or one of his first secretaries. So, of course, this very, very, very handsome man here is Dr. John S. Lamont. This is Dr. John S. Lamont and Shoghi Effendi in England, and we're going to look at this in detail next week, because next week is all about Shoghi Effendi in England, and his friendship with Dr. S. Lamont is a big part of that. And then this, of course, the opening page of Baha'u'llah and the New Era and the cover of the first edition. So Dr. John S. Lamont was born in Scotland, and he had always been interested in religious and spiritual subjects. He was very, very well read and extremely well educated. He spoke fluent French, German, Spanish, and Esperanto, learned Arabic and Persian immediately after becoming a Baha'i in 1915. And his purpose was to translate the writings into English from the original languages. By October 1916, Dr. S. Lamont had begun working on Baha'u'llah and the New Era, and he had begun a correspondence with Abdu'l-Baha, with Shoghi Effendi, which Shoghi Effendi, in his correspondence to him, hopes that their writing is going to be continuous, inspiring, and regular. So they had already started writing, I'm assuming, when Shoghi Effendi was in Beirut, because that's the time where he was studying at Syrian Protestant College. By early January 1919, Dr. S. Lamont received from Shoghi Effendi a tablet revealed in his honor by Abdu'l-Baha, in which Abdu'l-Baha hoped that Dr. S. Lamont would become a torch so that light and knowledge may shine out from him, adding, "Concerning the book you are editing, send me a copy thereof." Dr. S. Lamont immediately obeyed and immediately forwarded to Abdu'l-Baha the first 9 chapters of Baha'u'llah and the New Era, mentioning that he had committed Abdu'l-Baha's tablet to him to memory. How sweet, very sweet. When Baha'u'llah and the New Era was almost finished, Dr. S. Lamont, at long last, arrived in Haifa for pilgrimage. He was very ill with dysentery. It wasn't a very pleasant pilgrimage for him. He was sick most of the time. Dysentery is a very nasty intestinal illness, and he was confined to bed for several days. But he was very close with Shoghi Effendi. They had a good friendship, close friendship already. And he managed to take meticulous notes for his books, even though he was ill. He gathered a lot of information. He questioned dozens of early illustrious Baha'is who were in the Holy Land. He accumulated material, and most of the material came directly from Abdu'l-Baha in after-dinner conversations. Those same after-dinner conversations, 14 years prior, which had given rise to some answered questions. So wonderful, wonderful stay despite his illness. But on the 5th of December, he was feeling better, and Dr. S. Lamont and Abdu'l-Baha took a drive through the rain together. Abdu'l-Baha taught S. Lamont a few words of Persian, and S. Lamont taught Abdu'l-Baha a few words of Esperanto. A few days later, Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi, Dr. S. Lamont, and Lutfullah Hakim visited Akka, the Garden of Rizwan, and the Shrine of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah and the New Era would be published in September 1923. September 1923. And the impact of the book would be nothing short of monumental. Shoghi Effendi would encourage the publication of this book in every language. It was the introductory book to the Baha'i Faith for decades and decades to come, a work of art. And just before I go on to the next story, Shoghi Effendi would later say that Dr. John Eslam, the success of Baha'u'llah in the New Era was due to the pure intention of Dr. John Eslamont. And actually, Dr. John Eslamont was the very, very first hand of the cause that the Guardian would raise posthumously. Even before Haji Amin, the very first hand of the cause raised by the Guardian posthumously would be Dr. Eslamont. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. That's for part 6. And one trait of Shoghi Effendi is that he never forgot his friends. And in December 1919, he writes again to Ali Yazdi. In December, this is Ali Yazdi in Germany. This is a photograph of Ali Yazdi in Germany from Blessings Beyond Measure. I highly recommend you read that book if you haven't read it. It's really wonderful. And for a while, Shoghi Effendi didn't know where his friend was. And so finally his father arrived and gave him his address. So he was able to send him a letter. So he's very excited to finally be able to write to his friend, because for a few months, he didn't know where to send his letters. And so Shoghi Effendi tells him that he's still doing the same work that he was when he left for university. And he teases him in the letter and says that, don't forget me, because I cannot forget the dear Sheikh. He often refers to Ali Yazdi as the Sheikh, which I think Sheikh Ali was actually his name, but then Shoghi Effendi likes to call him the Sheikh. This is, I believe this is the only picture of Shoghi Effendi and the greatest holy leaf, his great aunt. And if anybody knows of another one, you're free to put it in the chat and tell me afterwards. But I believe in my searching for pictures, I think this is the only photograph I've ever found of Shoghi Effendi. And what I like about this picture is if you look closely, you can see the blue eyes of Bahiya Khanum, the greatest holy leaf. And you can see that particular quality of hazel eyes, which Ruhiya Khanum describes so clearly in Priceless Pearl, of changing color eyes of Shoghi Effendi from warm light brown to gray. You can see that changing color character in his eyes. It's very, very beautiful picture. So just 8 days after writing to his friend Ali Yazdi in Berlin, all of a sudden, there are 50 pilgrims who arrive in Haifa at the same time, and Shoghi Effendi is exceedingly busy. They are Arabs, Kurds, Persians, Americans, Europeans, Japanese, and he writes to his friends and say, we miss you. We miss you. I miss you, but I'm so busy. I have 50 pilgrims here. I have to run. And Abdu'l-Baha, in the meantime, has been revealing absolutely wonderful tablets to his beloved Baha'is in Germany, including Consul and Mrs. Schwartz, Mr. and Mrs. Harrigal, Miss Knobloch, and Pastor Hydron. And Shoghi Effendi's closes his letter to Ali Yazdi by saying, give my love to all the brothers and sisters in Stuttgart. I am ever your brother, Shoghi. So that the ending of his letters, your true brother, is something that he's been writing for years, even since he was 21, because he closes this letter with a version of that. I am ever your brother, Shoghi. Now, in January 1920, something exciting happens. This is the period January to April 1920. This is the last section of this part of Shoghi Effendi's life. Something very exciting happens in January 1920. Abdu'l-Baha's car arrives. This is Abdu'l-Baha's Cunningham automobile, a 7-passenger touring car gifted by Ella Goodall. And you can see our beloved Saichiro Fujita behind the wheel here. In January 1920, along with an arrival of new pilgrims, was another arrival of an entirely new sort. The arrival of Abdu'l-Baha's hand-built 7-seater Cunningham automobile. Cunningham automobiles were one of the earliest vehicles in the advent of the automotive age. And the master's Cunningham automobile was a gift from Ella Goodall Cooper. The car at the time cost around almost $100,000 today. Saichiro Fujita, who had been invited by Abdu'l-Baha to come and live in the Holy Land, accompanied the automobile from the United States to Haifa, where he stayed on as one of the drivers and mechanics. When the automobile arrived in Haifa, Abdu'l-Baha did something very interesting. He instructed Shoghi Effendi to have it cleared through customs and delivered to his home. The car arrived on a weekend, and Shoghi Effendi managed to get it delivered to Abdu'l-Baha, even though it was not during the business week. When the car was outside the master's house, Shoghi Effendi went to his grandfather and informed him the car had arrived. Abdu'l-Baha was very surprised and deeply pleased and asked Shoghi Effendi how he managed to do this on a weekend. Shoghi Effendi replied that he had taken the papers himself to the homes of the various city officials and asked them to sign the documents to give the necessary orders to immediately release Abdu'l-Baha's car into his possession. This is so wonderful. I want to read you what Ruhiya Khanum said about this event, because she really interpreted it perfectly. These are her words. This was typical of the way Shoghi Effendi did his work throughout his entire life. He always wanted things done at once, if not sooner, and everything he had any personal control over progressed at that speed. So in essence, basically, managing to clear the master's car through customs on a weekend at Abdu'l-Baha's express instructions, doing it immediately and as fast as possible and as well as possible. That is another kind of training moment, because Abdu'l-Baha gave that task to Shoghi Effendi, and Shoghi Effendi acquitted himself of this task with flying colors. This vignette is also a brief snapshot of what the Guardian is like and what the Guardian will be like 2 years from now when Abdu'l-Baha tragically passes away suddenly, and all of those responsibilities are poised on Shoghi Effendi's shoulders. But we do not have to speak of unpleasant things now. Now we can speak of pleasant things, such as in early 1920, Shoghi Effendi and Abdu'l-Baha traveled together to Adasiye, Abdu'l-Baha's agricultural village, where he grew a lot of the wheat that he sent to Haifa and Akka during the war and even after. And this is near that area. This is not that exact area. This is the landscape around Adasiye. This photograph was taken less than 5 kilometers away from Adasiye, but it's not Adasiye. Sometime in early 1920, Abdu'l-Baha paid his 4th and last visit to Adasiye for 1 day and 1 night. Before he arrived, Bedouins, so nomadic Arab tribes, had invaded the village, but the Baha'is had not been harmed, even though the Bedouins had outnumbered them. Soon after his arrival, Abdu'l-Baha informed the Baha'i farmers that the purpose of his visit was to put in place a permanent arrangement with them. Shoghi Effendi accompanied Abdu'l-Baha on his last visit to Adasiye and rode on horseback with his grandfather through the area. If you could just imagine Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi on horseback through the wheat fields, with the wind blowing and the wheat dancing and the bright blue sky and the sun shining. How amazing. Might have been cold because it's in January. During the course of this short visit, Abdu'l-Baha reduced his share of the farmers' profits. The war was over. His needs had decreased, and he felt this was fair. And he emphasized to the Baha'is the importance of daily devotional gatherings and practicing consultation to resolve disputes. He also left his beloved farmers wise economic advice, recommending they pay their laborers a percentage of the share of their profits. The local assembly of Adasiye would be formed 4 years later in 1924 under the ministry of Shoghi Effendi. But early 1920 is also a time when Shoghi Effendi and Abdu'l-Baha began making plans for Oxford. As far back as 1910, which we saw in part 1, when he talked to the Swiss doctor, Falschir, he had envisioned that his eldest grandson would study in Oxford. Abdu'l-Baha requested his friend Lord Lamington, a distinguished Scottish lord and a man who deeply respected and admired him, to use his influence in getting Shoghi Effendi admitted to a college at Oxford. By early 1920, Abdu'l-Baha had decided that Shoghi Effendi should go to England sooner rather than later. The reason that Shoghi Effendi was going to go to Oxford was to perfect his command of English to the highest possible degree in order to translate the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha and the Baha'i holy writings into flawless English. Outwardly, it would seem that this was not the ideal time for Shoghi Effendi to leave Abdu'l-Baha's service, given that the master's post-war correspondence was increasing with every passing day. But the decision for Shoghi Effendi to leave was made based on several factors. Number one, the sooner Shoghi Effendi left to pursue his studies, the better, because the sooner he would be finished and would return. Second, there were already several people who were acting along with Shoghi Effendi as Abdu'l-Baha's secretary, so he was not the only one doing this job. Third, Shoghi Effendi's eldest cousin had just finished his studies in Beirut and was now living and serving in Haifa, so he could take over, possibly. The fourth reason is studied in greater detail in the next story. Now, the fourth reason why this makes sense for Shoghi Effendi to leave right now is because Abdu'l-Baha is in perfect health. We saw that he's working these massive days, but he is filled with energy. He's in the best shape of his life, despite being 76 years old. The strains of the war had placed on his health of ease now, and his health has steadily improved. When Major Tudor Pole came to visit Abdu'l-Baha as soon as he could after the war in November 1918, he wrote back and he said, "The master is more vigorous and more healthy than when he was in London in 1912. So everyone felt that Abdu'l-Baha was in the best health they had ever seen. And no one had any fear that he would die. Definitely not in the next 12 months. It would have been unthinkable for them. That's why Shoghi Effendi left with no worries as far as the master's health was concerned. Absolutely, there were no worries in Shoghi Effendi's mind. And the fifth reason is that by early 1920, guys, Abdu'l-Baha was planning another trip. And this was where he was going to go. He was going to leave Haifa. He was going to go to India, and then Indochina, which is Vietnam, then Japan, then I'm guessing Hawaii, the west coast of America, travel through America, the east coast of America, London, France, Germany, Egypt, and back to Haifa. This was going to be his second journeys to the west and to the east. Very ambitious. And Shoghi Effendi announced the master's plan to the friends in England, saying, "What is significant and alluring is the intimation of the beloved himself that he is planning and thinking of such a journey across the Indian Ocean. He even declared that, God willing, he wishes to undertake a voyage to India and thence to Indochina," as I said, Vietnam, "Japan and the Hawaiian Islands, and from there cross the American continent to your beloved city of London, to France, Germany, and Egypt. Oh, how fervent, how deep, how sincere is our hope that such a journey, which he himself has fixed its duration to be 4 or 5 years, will be undertaken. Let us hope and prepare for it." And so Shoghi Effendi was leaving Haifa with perfectly serene state of mind. Not only serene, but he was so excited and joyful in these letters, talking about the upcoming journey of Abdu'l-Baha. He had a serene state of mind. He had a clear conscience. And he was making plans of his own, no doubt, to this time accompany Abdu'l-Baha on this 5-year journey through the East and the West. An honor that he'd been so cruelly deprived of when he was 15 years old, when he was turned back in Naples. Naples? In Italy. And so what we have to look forward to, my very dear friends, is next week, we're going to be looking at The Guardian, Part 7. See, I'll show you how it works here. This is the menu. See, it tells you what we've done this so far. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and next week we're going to do Part 4. And Part 4 is Shoghi Effendi in Oxford. So we're going to look at Shoghi Effendi's life in Oxford and his the major experiences of this year and a half. And of course, this is the last part of Shoghi Effendi before he becomes the beloved guardian. Thank you all for coming here today on Zoom. Thank you to all of you who are watching this on Facebook and YouTube. And I hope to see you again next week.